Namaste children. Heredity. This word did not date in the directory of biology before 200 years. Scientists were clueless that this phenomenon going to be a world-changing breakthrough. With the basics of reproduction, I would like to ask a few questions to you. What is the mode of reproduction most of the higher organisms will opt for? Yes, sexual reproduction. Why children? Why so? It's because sexual reproduction is the process which leads to variations. What is the importance of variation over there? It is the one which opts for survival of fittest. Then that is the one which is after all could be selected by the nature. So it is the cue given by the nature for the organisms to be selected. Fine. Why? Only the sexual reproduction gives such a kind of variation. It is not actually one way. It is not the one process which leads to variation. The asexual reproduction will also lead to variations. But the significance of the products out of sexual reproductions are higher compared with the products which are produced out of asexual reproduction. Now the question is, what causes the variation to happen out of sexual reproduction? The answer is supposed to be the accumulation of variation which happens over generations. What causes the accumulation of variation? It is the mistake or the error which happens behind the DNA copying mechanism, or otherwise called as DNA replication. So when these errors or the mistakes keep on get accumulating, that leads to someone who is called as B, who is deviated from the organism A. Consider A is supposed to be a parental generation. I would like to show you a video that will fascinate you to unravel the underlying mechanism behind such variations. Could you see diverse varieties of plants which are just being variegated and established throughout our biosphere, children? There are millions of species, so far recorded almost about 1.8 million. You could see some are too small, some are more like insects, some are so predaceous, some could act as in prey, some could penetrate through, some are so humble and polite, and some organisms which are ferocious. Genetics, the branch of biology which deals with heredity and evolution. These are produced as a product of sexual reproduction. We all share the same morphology or the body design, but the basic chemistry differs among us. This is because of the secret which resides deep inside our cells. Nothing but the nucleus. Nucleus consists of a chemistry, otherwise called as a colorful substance called as chromosomes, which are just the bundle of threads which compose the chemical structures called as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. After all, the final chemical which has been selected by the nature to encode all our secrets. This figure denotes the mode of asexual reproduction adopted by bacteria. Let's have this as the parental generation. So let me just mark it up with P. P denotes parental generation. When this bacterium undergoes asexual reproduction, it leads to the production of two products. Let me name it as F1. Generation 1 or filial generation 1. Then this bacterium and this other one eventually leads to two other kind of offsprings. Let me name it as F2, filial generation 2. Now the question comes, do all these variations in a species have equal chances of surviving in the environment in which they find themselves? What should be the answer, children? Of course, no. The environment is the one which selects the organisms to be the survival of fittest. Let's solve this activity, children. If a trait A, now I think this word trait is something which is new to you. Trait is the characteristic which is owned by an individual. For example, let me just tell you. Ram is tall, Shiva is short. The tall and short denotes the characteristics. but both of them symbolize their height. So, height is nothing but the trait we call in terms of genetics. If a trait A, so some organism which possess the trait A exists in 10% of a population. So, now the organism is in a population of an asexually reproducing species. The clue word here is asexually reproducing species, which is similar to the graph which we have seen just now. And a trait B exists in 60% of the same population. Which trait is likely to have arisen earlier? Here they are talking about something called as evolution, or which one has arisen earlier. Now let's just trait A is equal to 10%. Trait B is equal to 60%. Now the question is, these both are asexually reproducing organisms and they both live in the same population. So the question is, which one might have arisen earlier? The answer for this question, could you please just guess out, children? Of course, trait B. Why it's trait B? Because you could see this has the larger number in the population. That in turn denotes earlier the origination, greater the survival or greater the evolution. The etymology of genetics. Children usually feel struck when the genetic comes. It's because of the terminologies or the etymologies which is quite complicated in terms of genetics. The branch of science which deals with heredity and evolution. Now, let's see the very first definition of heredity. The transmission of traits over generations or from one generation to the other generation. Gene, the factor which decides the characteristics, which decides the traits. Now, always the question comes. There has always been confusion between chromosomes, chromatin, chromatids and genes. Let's just look into this visual, children. Could you see this X-shaped structure? So these are chromosomes, the condensed form of DNA. These chromosomes, when you zoom in, you could see the coiled thread-like structures are nothing but chromatin, which you are traveling through. The chromatin consists of the proteins called as nucleosomes. These proteins are present just to protect the messages which are encoded in the chromatin. Nothing but they are present to protect the nucleic acids. When you zoom in even, you could see the very familiar structure called as DNA. Now, what is the difference between DNA and a gene? The part of DNA which codes for a protein is called as gene. Is it restricted only with a protein? Not, of course, children. It is the part of DNA, which can even code for nucleic acids such as RNA. Let's not go much into it, but as of now, you have to remember gene is a part of DNA which codes for protein, and it is the functional unit of genetics. Alleles, the two copies of a trait. Let's see an activity over here, children. Could you see the paper strips which have been placed here? These paper strips are quite special. These are impregnated with a chemical called as PTC, phenyl thiocarbamide, or sometimes it is also called as phenyl thiourea. So what's quite special about this paper strip and the genetics? The thing is, some of you, when you taste this paper strip, could feel it bitter. Some other could not feel any taste out of this paper strip. What causes this variation among you? The thing is, the gene which gives the capacity for your tongue to taste this differs from the gene which is neutral. So, alleles are nothing but the two copies of a trait. Trait, height. Ram is tall, Shiva is short. The tallness and the shortness among these two individuals is called as allele. Dominant and recessive. This is very interesting factor which happens in our family also. If you have sibling at your home, there is always a concept will come. Who is dominant and who is recessive? Let's not much worry about the dominance and recessive which is quite used in our language. We need to mind much about the dominant and recessive terms which are used in genetics. Dominant, character expressed in F1 generation, whereas recessive, the character expressed in F2 generation. Here, you had seen the F1 and F2 which has been mentioned in the very previously when we were talking about the asexual reproduction in bacteria. So F1 generations are the offsprings out of parents, F2 generations are the offsprings which are out of F1 as parents. You have to remember one thing here, the dominant characters or the dominant traits are always expressed in capital letters, just to discriminate them from the recessive traits. Let's see an example of a family where the father, mother and the son are present. See, this is the kind of earlobe which is present in father. This is the kind of earlobe which is present in mother. Could you see the earlobes get attached over here, children? The same way the earlobes are free over here. The attached earlobe, just touch your earlobe and feel. How does it look like? Could you see it is whether free or it is something which is attached? Yeah. So, the people who are having free earlobes or seems to be dominant, where the people whoever has the fused one seems to be recessive. Now, why should we really need to talk about this? Is when the terms comes to what kind of earlobe will this boy will be inherited with. So dominance is the one which is inherited, the trait which is expressed in F1 generation. So as of this family photograph, let's consider these are as the P, parental generations. P, parental generation. This boy is the one who belongs to F1 generation. So just tell me children, what kind of earlobe inherited with? Dominant or the recessive one? The dominant trait. So this boy will be fortunated with dominant trait. So what did you tell as a dominant trait over here? Fused or the free one? The free earlobes, of course. So from this particular image, you now should have known to categorize who is a parental generation, who is a F1, who belongs to F1 generation, who is called as dominant, who is called as recessive, what is an allele, what is a trait. Homozygous, similar alleles, heterozygous, the alleles which are dissimilar. Could you see capital A, homozygous. The capital letter denotes the dominant over here. Small b, homozygous. And this small letter denotes the recessive character trait over here. Capital C, small c, heterozygous. The pair of genes which are dissimilar, but even it could code for dominance. Let's talk about few more terms in genetics. Phenotype, the physical form of an organism. Genotype, the genetic makeup of an organism. Phenotype is the expressive pattern of a gene. For example, if I say, Ram is tall, Shiva is short. The tallness and the shortness could be denoted as a phenotype. When I am asking you to write down the phenotype, you have to write down as tall, dwarf, fused earlobes, free earlobes, etc. Genotype, the genetic makeup of an organism. If I say someone is tall, then you have to denote that in the capital letter or a small letter. In that terms, tall can be denoted as T. Short can be denoted as small t. Now the question comes, how the alphabet should be denoted? The thing is, they should not be denoted as an individual. Rather, it should be denoted as in pairs. I will tell you, if you want me to denote the genotype for tallness, I will denote it with the letters capital T, or capital T, small t. Why suppose it to be like this, children? Could you just think over something about the sexual reproduction over here? Yes. So, we all know that we all are the products of sexual reproduction. So here, we are formed due to the fusion of paternal and maternal DNA. We have each chromosome with their copies. Listen to children. Even the gene as a pairs. That's what we were talking about the alleles so far. So here, capital T denotes the genotype of tallness. Just before we have seen something called as heterozygous, where I told you the dominant could be coded by even the heterozygous alleles. In those terms, this capital T, small t could also lead to a phenotype called as tallness. Could you differentiate between phenotype and genotype, children? Genotypes are always being denoted in letters, whereas phenotype talk about the traits, tall, short, having a bald head, something like that. Now, monohybrid cross. A cross between the parents or between the plants which differ in one trait. For example, if I am crossing two pea plant, before that, let me just check out something from you. You might have gone through something called as self-pollination and cross-pollination in your sexual reproduction. What is self-pollination, children? With respect to plants, what is self-pollination? The pollination which happens in a single flower or something which happens in a same plant, where the pollen grains from the anther will reach the stigma of the same flower or the same plant is called as self-pollination. Cross-pollination happens between the unisexual plants such as papaya. It's very well-known common example. What happens over there is the pollen from one plant will be pollinating the stigma of other plant with the help of some pollinating agents or otherwise called as pollinators, wind, water or insects. Now the thing is, we are talking about the monohybrid cross which happens between two parents, isn't it? So, when we consider about both parents here, the cross can happen either as a mode of self-pollination or as a mode of cross-pollination. Monohybrid cross, the cross between two individuals who have one contrasting trait. For example, if I am crossing two pea plants for example, one plant might be tall and the other one might be short. Whereas one might have the seeds which are round in shape, whereas the other might be having the seeds which are wrinkled in shape. One might be having the seed in yellow color, other might be having the seed in green color. So, the cross between two parents or two individuals who differ in one trait or one character could be called as monohybrid cross. Otherwise, dihybrid cross is nothing but the cross between the parents who differ in two characteristics. To sum up, from the beginning, we have seen what is the importance of genetics, what does the term heredity means, what is the difference between genes, chromosomes, chromatin, DNA. So, then we even talked about some etymologies or the terminologies which you need to know as a formula before you are entering into the subject. So, we had seen about what is called as a trait, what is a gene or otherwise called as a factor, what is dominant, what is recessive, what is homozygous, what is heterozygous, what are alleles, homologous chromosomes and heterologous chromosomes, genotype, phenotype, monohybrid and dihybrid cross. I just want to give a test for you children. Within an instant, I am expecting you to answer this question. From these two plants which have been given here, could you just identify the answer for all these questions which have been asked here? Identify the dominant trait. So the word which is given here is trait. Could you identify the dominant trait over here, children? Dominant. Tall. Good. So the dominant trait could be tallness over here. Identify the recessive trait. Of course, darkness. Give the genotype for tallness. I told you we are the products of sexual reproduction. So here we should denote something in two letters if I am right, isn't it? So it should be the genotype for tallness you have understood that tallness is a dominant trait. In that terms, here capital T could denote a dominant trait. Shall I move on to the next question? No, because heterozygous could also code for dominant trait. Isn't it, children? Now, give the phenotype for daftness. Daft. Being daft is a phenotype. Give an example for homozygous dominant. Homozygous. So, two which are similar. And the clue given here is dominant. So, it could be capital T, capital T. Shall I put capital T, small t also here? No, because the word mentioned here is homozygous. Homo, similar. Give an example for heterozygous recessive. So it should be recessive. Is it possible, children? Heterozygous recessive. Shall I put capital T, small t? Has a heterozygous recessive over here. Will that be right? No. Once the allele become dominant, if you denote something with capital letter over there is no point of asking something as recessive. So it is mandatory for any recessive trait should be present as in pairs. So there is no possibility of heterozygous recessive. Hope you understood. Namaste.